Yeah, hi Zoom. Sorry, we are recording this on Zoom too, and you should be able to hear us now. Maybe say something in the chat if you can't. But yeah.
Yeah, we can hear you. Thank you.
So we just got started over the recruiting process.
Yeah. All right. So the behavioral interview. So if we talk about what a behavioral interview is, essentially like to any company, there's two things, right? There's the work that they actually do, and then there's like the culture fit, right? Like each company has a culture. Some have like a fail fast culture, which means like, just keep running your code into production. And then if you fail fast, fix it and keep going kind of a thing. Some companies have a very like safe culture where they will not let you deploy anything unless it has been verified by like two other engineers or something. Like each company has like slightly different work culture, slightly different like intricacies within the company. What the behavioral interview is a way for them to kind of talk to you and get a sense for what your personality is like, what kind of an engineer you're going to be in terms of like how you're going to behave. For example, like, like in a tough situation, if you're under a lot of pressure, can't meet a deadline, what are you going to do? Like they want to understand what kind of a person you are and see whether that's a culture fit for the kind of company that they are as well. So there's strategies for this, like there's some standard questions, like it's, there are a lot of things that go into it. Like 3 things that you can do to like prep for it better is like have an elevator pitch ready. For those who don't know what that means it's like a 1 minute introduction of who you are as an engineer and who you are as a person. Use the STAR method that we'll go into like a little bit later. And in general, like people like storytellers. Stories are entertaining. So, I think that's the 3rd strategy there. Here's kind of like a list of more common behavioral questions. Like obviously I'm not going to go read through the entire list. This slide is available to all of you, so you can always go back and do that. The more important things are like, they might ask you for like some difficulty that you ran into, how would you deal with it? Or they'll ask you in general, describe a time when you like kind of like showed off your skills in a really good way. Or they'll ask you just, like, just tell us about yourself. Like those are all like fairly common things that I've definitely heard on a lot of interviews. But yeah, the entire list is available to you on the slides later on.
Yeah, and one other thing to add, like what Amanda was mentioning earlier about being a storyteller. So usually anybody can say they know this, they know that, but very few people can come up with on the spot like an actual experience that they've gone through and explaining like the process of that. And usually a lot of the time that experience can answer one of these questions. So like keeping note of all your things like that in your like past and your experiences definitely will help out in a behavioral interview.
So how to prepare for these interviews? Unfortunately, like behavior interviews aren't like, there's no like set in stone way to like prep for it, but there's ways that you can kind of like be more ready to answer different questions. Like Avi mentioned, like, there's obviously like telling stories is good. Like if someone asks you a question, you should have a story ready to go. For example, an experience that you had that maybe you struggled with something and how you overcame it, like having those stories ready to go, having those like at the tip of your tongue is a great idea. Other things is like, well, in general, don't lie on your resume. And even if you do, make sure you know what you lied about, because like they're gonna ask you what is on your resume. Like they're gonna ask you, like if you're at a personal project on your resume, they're gonna ask you about, what inspired you to go do this thing? Why did you do it? How did it go? Like, did you run into any difficulties? Stuff like that. Always be ready to answer those questions. And then yeah, like obviously like each company has like a set of questions. Like each company also has usually like a mission statement. They'll have like pillars for their work culture, which will be like I think Amazon has like 7 of them. Like each company will say like, they'll have like different like words that resonate with the company's work culture. You can revise those. There's like different ways to kind of like prepare yourself and have stories ready, but there's no like one fine way to like answer everything. So back to the elevator pitch, like I mentioned, this is like a 1-minute summary of who you are as an engineer, who you are as a person. It usually starts with like at the start of a phone call, our recruiter will call you. They'll introduce themselves a little bit, and then they'll ask about you, right? That's one of the first things that like they'll ask you. They'll just say, tell me a little bit about yourself, and then they'll go into your background, right? So what this means is like you're basically like telling them who you are as a person so that they can dig deeper and like you can tell them more stories about that, right? This should definitely go past just what is on your resume, because you didn't get a call without your resume anyway. So they've already seen your resume before. What you want to do is kind of go beyond just that resume. Usually these are 1 minute. In those, like, these are things that you should definitely mention: name, school, major, kind of like something you've accomplished in engineering, whether it's a personal project, whether it's an internship experience, whether it's a full-time job experience, anything like that. If you have done your research and you know what the company's like core values are, you can kind of touch on those, like talk about how like something that you've done kind of touches on those core values. and just in general, why you're interested in the company. One thing not listed here that we will add is more recently, just the way the world is right now, like pronouns are really important. I would definitely encourage you to mention those when you're like introducing yourself as a person. I would say that's a very important one there as well. And a last thing to do is make yourself unique. You know, like recruiters call like 100 people a day, give or take. Well, actually, that might be an exaggeration, but like they call a lot of people. They hear everybody say the same thing every time. Make yourself stand out. Each of you is like individualistic. Each of you has something going for you. Make that stand out. And now we're going to talk about the STAR method, which is kind of like a good way to kind of break down these questions. So any behavioral question, you know, like something that you struggle with, any of these questions will kind of, you can break it down into these 4 things. And this is like a good way to answer a question. This is like, I don't know how many of y'all had this in middle school, but like we went through this in middle school too. I don't know if you remember it, but if you don't, basically first is you got to give them context, right? That's the situation. If they ask you, for example, like name a time you struggled and how you overcame, you want to give them the context first. You can't really just tell them, oh yeah, I overcame it. Like, no, you got to give them a little bit of context of what exactly was going on. Then you got to give them the task, like what you were in a situation, you were trying to accomplish something, right? Tell them what you're trying to accomplish. Then you answer like, you know, how you went about it, what the struggle was, how you went around that situation. And then the result as in like any tangible result. For example, you could say, we actually finished the project, or ended up switching groups. Like depending on how it went, like you can answer in either of those 2 ways, but you have to like kind of like explain that you learned something from it. It can't just be like an experience, it's an experience that you learn from. And that's also something that they're always looking for.
Okay, yeah, so we'll move on to the technical interview. So these probably are, a lot of you probably heard about like what a technical interview like typically contains. But we'll go over exactly what each company is kind of looking for and how you can prepare for them. So why do companies ask technical interviews? So they definitely, obviously they want to assess how good you are at problem solving and your programming skills mostly. So they want, and then even more importantly, to be honest, is they want to see that you can communicate effectively with them. They want to see that you're able to go over your thought process in a clear and understandable way, and explain why you arrived at a solution and why you ended up there. And just generally, you don't always need to finish. If you get a question, you don't always need to finish it exactly, but interviewers are looking for you to give it your best shot, obviously, and they want you to get as much of it as done as you can. And their purpose is not just to ask you the question, but their purpose is to help you. And if you have any questions yourself during the process, they'll help you out. And so we'll go over on to how you can get started to prepare for them. So yeah, I don't know. You guys are probably first, second, third years, I'd assume. But if you want to get started on preparing for a technical interview, the clear classes that you definitely want to take at some point are ICS 33 and ICS 46. So yeah, these are Python and data structures, and they'll give you like the foundation you need to get started on 99% of the technical questions that you're going to get asked in a technical interview. And let's say you haven't taken these classes yet, but you still want to kind of get started on preparing for technical interviews. Well, that's great because there's a lot of resources online and a lot of things to take advantage of. For example, there's a lot of books that you can find that basically will go over every single topic that is typically asked in a technical interview. For example, like cracking the coding interview. I'm sure if you just like actually Google it, you can find like a free PDF of it online. Just so definitely take a look at that. And then yeah, and then there's a bunch of like just practicing materials you'll also be able to find online. I'm sure you guys have heard of LeetCode. It's pretty popular, and it has a lot of the popular questions that are asked by these tech companies. And another one is called binary search, and I think it's where you can practice algorithms with friends and like in a cooperative environment. So yeah. Oh, about LeetCode too. Questions are organized into categories. So easy, medium, and hard. And there's a couple other categories too. So if you're a complete beginner and looking like, where do I even get started? You'll be able to check out this link later, but the top 100 like questions is a great place to start. And you could start with like the easy questions. And the reason why these are like the top 100 liked is because people like will realize that these kind of questions, they teach like a concept or a concept that's super valuable, and it's used commonly in a lot of questions. So usually if you do these kind of questions, even if you get hit with a completely different question during your interview, you'll be able to, adapt on the fly and kind of figure out what you need to do from there. Yeah, and this is just a quick preview of what that top 100 looks like. So if you go to that page, you'll see the difficulty of all these problems. And I definitely recommend just starting with the easy problems and working your way up, basically. And each question has like a discussion section too, where people are talking about the problem and like various approaches on how to solve it. So definitely like take a look at that if you're struggling or you want some help. And also related to that too, I'm going to quickly plug like a Discord server that definitely might help you guys out. It's called cscareers.dev, and they actually have a bot. That's super useful. Basically, let's say you score an interview with your dream company, for example, like Microsoft, and they have a bot where you could just type like problems Microsoft, and it'll give you a list of lead code problems that might appear on your Microsoft interview. And these are just kind of what other people have gone through in their experience and like documented. So that's pretty valuable. And then also they have like a process tracking bot. And this one's a little bit more complicated, but it's basically people who voluntarily like offer what stage they are in the recruitment process. So earlier I went over like the assessment, the phone, and the final. And usually people like you can kind of see this. So this is like for 2022 summer. You can kind of see how to read this as 179 people have gotten the online assessment for Amazon. And then there's been 162 offers for Amazon. So that's kind of, and that's just like what people have offered. That's not actually like the real number. It's obviously higher than that because not everybody will put it on the spot. But other than that, it's like pretty useful. You can come talk to me later too if you want to figure out how to join the Discord too. So yeah, just like earlier before, we have a lot of examples of what kind of will appear on a technical interview. So these are just like typical topics that you'll see. And like I mentioned, some of these stuff you'll learn in ICS 33 and 46. I kind of sorted them by like easiest to hardest, and also what I've seen like most commonly and least commonly. Yeah, so the last part, time and space complexity, that's something you'll learn in ICS 33 too. And it's super valuable because they'll ask you that basically with any question that any technical question you'll get asked. They'll also ask you what's the time and space complexity of the problem, which just means like how it runs efficiently or non-efficiently. And yeah, so that's pretty important too. And also some companies won't ask lead code style questions. Actually, they'll ask more practical questions like actual implementation. So like maybe making a request to an API or something like that. So definitely research the company before you have the interview and figure out what kind of technical like culture they have, and whether they're going to ask like a algorithms question like the top part, or more practical question. But yeah. So yeah, practicing for technical interviews. So this is the fun part. So definitely the major tip I'd recommend is just get started as early as you can. There's so many problems out there that you're definitely not going to be able to do all of them. So you're going to want to spend as much time as you can like learning the concepts and kind of using the problems as practice. When you're doing the problem, kind of show like what you know. If you've seen a problem before and you practice it and you get asked it during interview, what I'd recommend is like just pretend like kind of you've never seen it before, and then like solve it like right there in during the interview, and then the interviewer will be pretty impressed that you're able to figure it out. And yeah, like I mentioned before, your interviewer is there to help you. So usually if you have any like small questions like regarding syntax, or even like bigger questions like what do I do next, or how do I kind of make my solution better, they'll usually help you out with that. And yeah, that's mostly it for that. Yeah, so more about the technical interview itself. Yeah, so like I mentioned before, probably the most important thing is they want to see how well you can communicate, more than whether you're just able to get the right answer or not. And that's really important, especially for technical interviews, because like I mentioned, questions usually have multiple solutions, and sometimes there's a much better solution and a much worse solution. And yeah, that might be, you guys, it's known usually like there's a brute force solution and then like an optimal solution. And if you can't get the optimal solution, it's actually a good thing just to give them a brute force solution, because that'll at least show what you know. Like I mentioned, highlight your strengths. And usually, if you do get the brute force solution, the interviewer will usually like poke you in the right direction to get the optimal solution, and they'll help you out. So yeah, just write what you know. Even if you don't know the exact answer, just write. To be honest, like write what you know, and they'll be like it'll put you ahead of other applicants who didn't do anything basically. And yeah, don't be afraid to ask any questions to your interviewer, because they're there to help you. Yeah.
Okay, so generally, like, how do you prepare for an interview? I mean, there's a lot of things that you can do here. So obviously, there's multiple aspects of the interview that we just went over. One thing I'd definitely say is research the company beforehand, whether that means like, looking up on LeetCode, like what are the general type of questions that they ask you for this company, or whether that's researching the company's like culture. If it's a behavioral interview, like you have to do your research. You got to know what you're walking into before you go into an interview. I think that's pretty important. There's always common questions. Like, no company has ever like not asked me, tell me about yourself. Like that's something everybody should know how to answer. So like prepare for those kind of questions. And in general, like you should definitely practice, like whether that means like, like just interviewing enough that like you have that practice, or working with your friends to like kind of like mock interview each other, or, like finding someone who can mock interview you. Like all of these are great resources. Like definitely lean on people and like kind of get as much practice as you can going into an interview.
Yeah, and like I may have mentioned, definitely if you get an interview and you're nervous about it, you just know that it's going to be practice for you, and it's going to help you in any other future interviews you might have, which you probably will. So yeah, just use any interview you have as an opportunity.
Yeah. Before the interview, I feel like these are kind of like very logical things, like make sure you're well rested, make sure you've eaten. It's very awkward if like you're on a phone call with the recruiter and you just hear your tummy rumble or something. Like that's not going to end well for you. Definitely be in a distraction-free environment. You don't want too much like background noise when you're on an interview. And definitely like if it's in person, arrive early. If it's on Zoom, try to log in like maybe 5 minutes earlier. Like that just shows your punctuality. And you made it to the interview. Like don't worry about it. Like the interview is going to go the way it's going to go. The last 30 minutes before the interview did not change the outcome of the interview at all. So just relax and just, go through the process. During the interview, I think like the tips and tricks for this kind of depend on what type of an interview it is, but there's some general like logical things that you can kind of do. One thing is like you're interviewing generally to be either an intern or a new grad. That means you're like, you don't actually know everything, right? And it's okay to admit that. Like you should be more open to learning. Like, if the recruiter says something really interesting, or if the engineer is kind of like poking in the right direction, it's okay if you even say, oh, I never thought about that, but that makes sense. Like that's totally fine. Like if you're going in an internship, you're assigned a mentor. That means they already know that like you're not going to know what's going on. And it's okay to like for them to know that during the interview as well. Again, like being able to talk to people is really important. Like as like an intern, you're gonna be talking to a mentor, right? Like if you are not good at asking for help, you're not going to be a good intern for them either. So it's okay to ask for help on those things. And yeah, like one thing is like you're interviewing for a company, but you're also interviewing the company. Like you also want to know if they're a good fit for you, not just if you're a good fit for them. So keep that in mind. Ask the questions that you have about the company's work culture, about what the company does, anything you want.
Yeah, and regarding that too, like basically every interview I've had, usually the last 5-10 minutes will go to you asking questions to the interviewer themselves, and don't just like be like, I have no questions or anything. Definitely like think of a few beforehand or during the interview itself too, which is fine. But it definitely shows like you're curious and you were willing to learn. And these interviewers, they're usually like engineers or engineering managers or hiring managers. So they have a lot of experience, perhaps in like the field that you're looking to be in. So they will have a lot of good advice to give you. So yeah, definitely utilize that.
Yeah, and then after the interview, it's always nice to get a thank you email. You can go ahead to reach out to your recruiter or interviewer. I would say both is usually a good thing, because so usually when whoever reaches out to you initially will be usually like a recruiter or a coordinator, right? And then you work with that coordinator, schedule interviews with an engineers generally. So if you can get the engineer's email, that's great. Otherwise, just email the recruiter or coordinator, tell them thank you, and also ask them if you can get your interviewer's email address so you can reach out to them as well. Definitely, like at the end of an interview, like you'll know whether you did well or not, like sort of. But you can definitely reflect on it, think about like what you could have done better, what could have gone differently, and keep that in mind for your next interview. That's what we mean by practice. Like you're going to catch these things and you're going to work on them, and you'll be better for the next interview. Okay, any questions? I know we went over like a lot, so
Yeah.
yeah.
I would say you went over like everything in case you kind of do well in the interview. But at the same time, I feel like not everyone always gets like the interview. What are some things that you can do, like get a better chance of after like getting the interview?
Unfortunately, like the things that come down to that are like experience, and kind of like personal projects. Like those are kind of like more quantitative things. Unfortunately, like in a lot of cases, like they like a recruiter usually looks at your resume, but in some cases they kind of just have like a process, like it's all automated. So realistically, like what you can do is kind of work on personal projects, like show what you've learned. It's not just about like knowing something; it's also about being able to showcase it. So whether that's through an internship, whether that's through a project, like there's multiple opportunities for it, but you sort of have to make those opportunities for yourself in some cases.
Yeah, and one thing also is it's definitely a lot of luck is involved, to be honest. Like you sometimes there'll be an applicant who gets the interview and some who doesn't, even though they might be pretty similar. So a tip I have too is just apply to as many places as you can. You don't really have anything to lose, and there's always positions that are opening up. So